So today I'm delighted to be joined by Ben Grant, who is an experienced electrician and author. Ben has almost 2 decades of experience in the trade industry and has recently relocated to Norfolk, where he's establishing his new electrical contracting business. Ben has also written an excellent book called Broken Standards, aimed at helping consumers demystify the process of choosing a contractor for their project, including all the potential pitfalls that go with it, and instead helping them to choose the right contractor to help them. So welcome, Ben, and thank you for joining me on the Happy Tradie Podcast.
Hello, and well, thank you for having me on, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
No problem. So we first chatted a few weeks ago, or maybe a couple of months ago now, because like I said in the opening, you're relocating, or you have relocated your contracting business to the Norfolk area, but you've got almost 2 decades of experience in the industry. So why don't we just start by be great to kind of hear how you got started in the industry and a little bit about your journey up to today.
Well, so I done my apprenticeship with my uncle. I was 19 at the time. I was working in a movie theatre, and he was working as an electrician, and then just couldn't believe that at 19 I didn't really have anything else to do except for working there. So, he said, come work for me. If it don't work out, we'll find you something else. And that was that. 3 years later, I finished my apprenticeship, and I've been in and out of quite a few jobs since then. My first company I really kind of got into was I think around 2015 time. It ran for about 3 years, and after 3 years, I didn't have some of the fundamentals I think that we need in business. I was focused on doing the good job, making sure that all of the stuff that I'm doing is to a high quality and everything. But I think a bit of a wake up really when I spoke to the accountant and got given a tax bill and suddenly realised I don't know why I'm bothering. I went and got a job with someone else for a few years, and after 3 years of working in central London, more because I've now got 2 girls, which are both one's 2, one's 2.5. And really, I didn't want to be in London anymore. So we came up to Norwich, and now in going into January, where I'm going to be working for myself. So I'm hoping that the timing's going to be better this time round than it was before. So there we go.
No, it's a great story, and I think it's so familiar with lots of trade business owners that they get into starting their business because they don't want to work for somebody else, and they like the idea of having a little bit of freedom and not being necessarily sort of told kind of what to do all the time. Then they go down the that natural sort of route of doing a great job, building the business, getting more clients on board, more kind of word of mouth comes their way. But of course, like you said, it's not always easy to have those fundamental business skills at the start. I mean, look, I'm if I'm totally honest, I'm sort of learning them as well as I grow my business, different business, but all the same challenges of putting different pots of money away to make sure that the tax man's got his cut.
Absolutely.
And I suppose you don't always realize it, but how many people actually take a cut of the revenue, and it's scary.
Yeah.
You got the materials, you got subcontractors, you got the tax man, you got insurances. They're all stuff that I suppose when you're starting out you don't always account for.
No, absolutely.
But yeah, so you've recently relocated up to Norfolk, and how are you finding life up there? Different pace.
Slower. Having come from central London, the sense of urgency up here, I think, is the most profound difference.
Yeah.
Everyone wants everything yesterday. In London and everything, so so time sensitive. But up here, there's not that urgency. I mean, sure, there's 1 or 2 things, but by and large, there's a lot more patience. People are in less of a rush.
Yeah.
And that's okay. So it's there's a bit of a change.
Different challenges. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's start kind of by having a look at the book. So as I said in the intro, there's the book. It's available on Amazon, where I got my copy. So the book title is Broken Standards, which kind of alludes a little bit about to what the book is about. But just in your words, what was the inspiration for the book?
Yeah. Well, I mean, most of my work's been some in installation, but a lot of it's in maintenance. And one of the opportunities that maintenance affords is being able to see installations once they've been finished, once they've been put out into usable life. And with maintenance comes inspections and testing. And what I was finding was a very high percentage of the work that I would carry out work on, or repairs to, or inspections on, or inspections to, would just fail. And not because they've worn out, not because they're that the parts perhaps aren't as good, but simply just because of install error. Perhaps something hasn't been installed. Perhaps it's worn out too quick because it hasn't been supported correctly. Any number of different things. And it really kind of came to a head over COVID, actually, because whilst COVID was going on, the government brought out the mandatory EICRs in private properties, or private rented properties. So for the first time, these EICRs were now mandatory, and the electrical industry was given that green flag to say, right, go and do these inspections that you've been arguing the toss for the last 2 decades. You want to be like gas safe, you want to get that signed off, fine, we'll make it a legal requirement. And they did, and we had more than enough EICRs coming in, certainly with the firm that I was working for, to get a really good understanding of just the level of installations, and how they've obviously been installed. Most of them less than 10 years old. Some of them a little over, but certainly those problems coming up, 95% of them would fail, and most of them would be install error. And one of the most difficult questions that I found myself having to continually answer was, well, it's new. It's only been in here 5 years. It's been in here 10 years. What could be wrong with it? It was signed off. He was good, whatever. But there's not really any way that you can kind of articulate why it's wrong or why it's broken. It's just, I've carried out the test, I've carried out the inspection, and it's failed. It's not right. It's either not compliant, or it's just not right. It needs to be changed. It needs to be put in differently. I mean, these faults, there's only so many faults that you can get before you've heard it all before, really. And there's a lot of recurring problems. So it wasn't too much trouble to take all of these faults that are coming up, all of these questions, and say, well, actually, you know what, I think for the first time I'm actually going to document them. I'm actually going to tell you that these are the kind of faults that we're getting, and I'm going to put that into a book. But further than that, I'm going to try and kind of explore the reasons as to why we're in this position in the first place. A lot of people have said, oh, well, it's qualifications, we need better qualifications. I'm like, yeah, but qualifications aside, what happens when they're qualified? What happens when they're out on site? So, well, it's maybe the competent person scheme's fault. I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe it is their fault. So what process there is going on that's causing this? And then there's a few other areas that people kind of point a finger at and saying, you're the villain, and if we was getting rid of you, then the industry would be better. And it's like, but it's more complex than that. And I wanted to make sure that I covered some of those main areas that lead us to where we are, and to lead us to these problems that we're getting. And hopefully trying to help people understand why we're here.
And how's it been received? It's got some good reviews going on Amazon, but generally, sort of, how's it received?
So I mean, I've got a bit of feedback from people. It's quite an ask getting them to read a book, because it's a big investment in time. And it's written for consumers that are having electrical work done, which that's not everybody. That's only if it's relevant to you. But from the people that have read it, they found it good. They found it very informative. They like that it's quite well written.
Yeah.
Which I was quite happy to know.
I mean, the structure of the book, actually, the way you lay it out really makes sense. Going
Right.
going through the different phases of the project. But actually, having read it, I mean, regardless of whether you're having electrical work or any work, there's loads of good takeaways that apply whatever project you're running. Just good practices.
Yeah.
What was your process for writing the book? I sort of asked because I'm interested, because I'm writing a book myself, with the same title of the podcast. I'm just really keen to sort of understand, like, how you fitted it all in,
Right.
how you dealt with times where you didn't feel like writing. Did you just kind of dive in? Just I'd love to hear about your process for writing, because actually, I'm sure there's loads of trades that have got ideas for books and content and just don't really know
100%.
how to get started. So
Yeah.
what was your process?
Well, I mean, yeah. So I mean, it's tough. I mean, I I've answered all these questions before, but they're all in my head. So how do I get what's in my head onto paper?
Yeah.
I guess one of the best things I found was to carry around a little voice recorder.
Yeah.
And I was trying to use my iPhone, but I was using that as a sat nav. I was using that for calls, for texts. I was using it for everything else, and I almost felt like this isn't working. I need something that's dedicated, so I can literally pick it up, push button, and speak.
Yeah.
Because I'd be working and something would come up, and I'm like, bang! This is the reason. This is why it's happening. Because wait, hang on, let's just get this out, and I recall, and I'm like, this is happening because X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And it would catch me in the flow of things.
Yeah.
It would catch me at a time when my brain is entirely focused on this problem, and it's this problem that I need to somehow distill down and kind of put that into writing and put that into a book. And I can't fabricate that when I get home. When I get home, it's disingenuous. I'm now trying to think, well, what was I feeling on the day? Like it's so difficult to remember. And I'm like, oh, well, you say one thing and that's not what you mean. And so for me, I needed that way of capturing the information. It's almost like its most organic and important point. And for me, a voice recorder done it. And I've still got probably 100 voice recordings, all about 5 or 10 minutes long. Some were about half an hour. And I think, right, we'll skip most of that. But all the information was there, and it was all just a matter of then compiling it onto that journey.
Yeah.
And that journey of well, let's start at the beginning. Let's make our way through, and eventually that person's going to find themselves shaking their hands with a customer and giving them a certificate. So what's led to this point here, and if I can get that journey, I can say, well, these are the parts of the journey that are causing the problems.
Yeah, some great advice in there. It's so much easier now, isn't it, with iPhones, smartphones in general, to sort of capture those moments. Everyone's got a recording device on them, so it's a little bit easier
right
these days. What are the plans to are there any plans to kind of to do any sort of follow-up books? Have you got anything else that you want to write about?
Yeah.
Been caught by the bug.
Yeah. Well, no, I have. I mean, I enjoy writing. I do, and I think one of the issues was I needed something to say.
Yeah.
So I think that was it was easy because I had a lot to say on that topic.
Yeah.
But looking at the different parts of the book, I think now it's more of a let's make this more bite-sized. Let's take the content that's already in there, and maybe target it toward the people that are going to find it the most use.
Yeah.
Because I think some of the best feedback I had was it's part memoir, but it's part training guide, and it's part consumer guide.
Yeah.
So if you could, rip those 3 separate entities out and then almost repackage it as something that's kind of more targeted to someone, because the target audience, I think, has been a bit difficult to kind of identify. So
yeah, I think the memoir is really interesting, because I think it's important to give context to your story, to be if you're going to write something, it needs to come from a place of authority. So I think it's really important to kind of weave your story. The fabric of the book is part of your life, and vice versa. I think that's really, really important. So just thinking about then, your new business kind of up in Norfolk. How's things going? What are the plans for the business over the coming sort of 12 months? It's at that point of the year. By the time this podcast goes out, it'll be the kind of start of the year, end of 22, start of 2023. What's your kind of plans for the next 12 months ahead for the business?
Well, I mean, it'd be me for now.
Yeah.
I guess I look back at what I was doing 5 years ago, and I think, well, what would I do differently, or what would I do the same? And knowing what I know now, I want to set everything up so that I'm ready to go in business. And it's mostly about filling that diary, really, and what do I need to consider to make that a reality. And it needs to be filled up relatively quickly, of course. So it's a lot of what I'm doing at the moment is just essentially getting everything ready so that in the new year, in 2023, I'm able to say I'm open for business. And hopefully welcome some customers in.
So you touched on something there as well when you said about not repeating the same mistakes. I mean, some of my this is kind of my second kind of full-on business. I ran a print and design business back in the sort of mid to late noughties, if we can call them that. I don't think there's a better description for the 2000s. And I ran it for about 8 or 9 years, and I learned so much. I learned huge amounts. One of the biggest takeaways I got was, stop being a bank to your customers. I would give 30 days credit, 60 days credit. And of course, it was massively hitting my cash flow. So second time around, I really set my stall out that my business was going to be structured differently, that I would no longer end up being effectively a lending service, because that's what so that was one of the biggest mistakes I made was effectively being a bank to my customers, which was hitting my cash flow, stopping me investing in growth. And in the end, it was just getting too stressful, chasing checks, chasing, I mean, what would you say are some of your kind of biggest learnings second time around?
I mean, that you've hit, I think, such a massive one, isn't it? I mean, that is one of the big tickets. It's the whole problem of making sure that the business does have cash flow, that it does have money coming through, and and I think the 30 and the 60 days, and I've heard of 90 days as well. If that's what your clients or customers are paying you, the financial burden's enormous. And I don't think there's any guarantees either. It could be a 90-day pay cycle, but they might just default. They may just not pay you. And that can be so bad. So it's I think my major considerations are having a process in place, having that discipline to say, well, these are my terms, and identifying how much you're going to charge for how much of your time, and just having a plan in place, because not having that plan, it means when it starts getting a bit difficult, where do you turn to? I think even if you've just given it some thought, even if your business plan can fit on a Post-it note, I'd argue that you're probably already doing better than half the people out there.
Do you know what? I'm so with you on that. I mean, in the book that I'm writing, I take trades through just developing a 1-page strategy.
Right.
Everything on 1 page. The vision that you have for the business, the vision you have for your business and your life. The mission, that your business is there. What problem is it solving? Your goals, and then breaking those goals down into little tactics for the year, and then a strategy. All that can be on 1 page. But like you say, even if you can get it on a Post-it note, it's it's far better than nothing. I would say. So So then, okay, so then just sort of moving on to kind of, the longer term, sort of picture for the business. What does that look like sort of beyond kind of 12, 18 months? Do you see it growing in the same way, that previous businesses have grown, or do you just want to keep it simple and keep it to yourself? How do you sort of see the longer term picture?
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because I mean, I enjoy doing my job. I don't know whether or not I want to grow it to the point where I don't need to be in the business. I can just take my hands off and let it run. But ultimately, I think there's no preconceived idea here.
Yeah.
I think what I would like to do is just offer the service that I want to offer to my customers. I want to get paid for doing it. I don't want to take on their burden, and then try and pick up the pieces because I've messed up somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
I like the idea of working in a team. So perhaps maybe within the next 18 months, 2 years, I might like to see myself having a couple of electricians joining this brand that I'm going to begin building.
Yeah.
And more just because I feel that that's going to provide me with, the the kind of company that I would like to be at the helm of. To know that I'm responsible for a couple of guys' salaries is nice because they're here by choice. They're not slaves.
Yeah.
they've chosen to come and get on board with what we're trying to achieve, and it's we're providing a service. If I'm not there, someone else is, and if they're not there, I'm there for them.
Yeah.
And it's just a nice way, I think, of having a career in electrical installation and inspection and testing. It's what I enjoy doing, and it's trying to do it more on my terms and control what can be controlled, I think.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And you know what? There's so many great tools out there, digital tools, kind of tools that make the job a lot easier, software that kind of automates a lot of the processes. I mean, we helped some clients, get set up on various platforms to, kind of automate a lot of the kind of end of job tasks, and a lot of the kind of keep in touch with customers and just thinking about, the money side of things, again, with mobile terminals that you can link to your phone. It's so much now, go back 10, kind of even really 5-10 years ago, people were still, trying to write out checks and things like that. And a lot of problems there. But now with these kind of mobile terminals linked with your smartphone, there's no excuse really for leaving a job, unpaid.
Right.
Because like we said, it's so important, keep the cash coming in and, the rest kind of follows. So just sort of before we wrap up, what advice have you got? Any nuggets for anyone that's thinking of starting out on their own in the electrical contracting business? What your kind of top tip for them?
Recognize what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah, do your research.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many leaders out there that are just giving knowledge away. Knowledge used to cost a fortune. In the noughties it was expensive. People would have libraries.
Yeah.
But now you can watch videos, podcasts, you can get books. If you can't read a book, then because you're always doing something. A physical paper book's difficult to absorb, take on. But you can use Audible. I've found so much value in that.
So turn off heart radio and switch on a podcast. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. Because you're going to get some new content. It's going to get your brain into that kind of, okay, well, I am actually learning. Every day at least I'm learning one lesson a day.
Yeah.
And that's so easily done and so achievable. And you don't want to learn the hard way. Really look at someone that's doing well and just ask them, what are you doing? And how are you doing it?
I think that's solid advice. Ask questions. I don't think.
Right.
I think one of the things when you start a business is you don't realize sometimes how lonely it can be unless you're surrounded by, big community or whatever. If
Right.
you're kind of working on your own, it can be a very lonely place. And I don't think enough people put their hand up and say, and just ask questions or ask for help.
Right.
I think that's some really solid advice there. Ben, just before we sort of wrap up, I just wanted to ask one final question. The title
Sure.
of the podcast is, the Happy Tradie. The aim of the podcast and the series is really just exploring kind of, business can lead to happiness. It doesn't always for some, but it is possible. So what's your definition of happiness? What's a happy life look like for you?
Well, it's such a difficult question to answer because it means so much. It means something different to someone else.
Yeah.
But I think it would probably be better to try and aim for a balance.
Yeah.
Because I think we're the pursuit of happiness. I'm like, yeah, but happiness is temporary, the same way anger and sadness and hopefully for some, depression is also temporary. But trying to strike some balance is I think more achievable. Because no one can really define happiness, and I think if you try, you're probably going to end up putting the wrong label on something that didn't need to be labeled. So it's just I aim for some balance, and also try and factoring if there is something that brings you joy and happiness, take it in equal measure with everything else.
I think that's a great ending to an awesome podcast. So thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing your nuggets of advice. There's some really great advice in there that people can unpack and implement in their day-to-day lives. And also not forgetting the book, which is available on Amazon and in any bookstores, or is it only on Amazon?
It's only on Amazon. Yeah.
Maybe get 50 copies and sneak them into some Waterstones around the country.
I think so. Definitely.
Ben, thank you so much for joining me on the Happy Tradie Podcast.
Been a pleasure. Thank you, Steve.